Welcome to the city's water education program. It's water drop by drop. I'm Leslie Grazer. I work in the Public Works office and I'm the water resource manager. I'm going to go through a few slides today to get you started. Our housekeeping slide, just so everybody stick together through this. You can bring your lunch, so on any day that you're here, you're welcome to bring your lunch along. We will have little snacks in the back. A reminder on cell phones. Mine sometimes rings at the wrong time, but we're pretty friendly around here, so just, get your phone when you get a chance. The program is videotaped, and we do this so that we can play these, or people who aren't able to be here can watch the program if they missed it. The purpose of Water Smart Drop by Drop is that there's lots of things to talk about water, and an informed community can make better decisions. So if you were with us last year, we ran through a series of about 12 or 11 topics, and then this year we're doing the same thing. We've added a few things, we've changed some speakers up, things like that, so that you learn more a little bit each time. The format of the program is that we do about 30 minutes of information. We leave about 10 minutes for kind of like group conversation, and then for another 10 minutes before we leave at 1 o'clock. If you had something that maybe wasn't on the topic we were speaking about today, or you wanted more details on something that we weren't able to get to, then we're happy to talk with you some more, so you just find the right person that you think would help on that one. And I've already basically, I didn't go through that part. There is fact sheets for every program. They are on the table where you came in, and you're welcome to take one of those. If you prefer not to have the paper, they're also on the city's website. Let's see. And I think that's it for this portion of it. I'll just take you to the calendar. So looking ahead, this is where we are today. It's State of Arizona Water Management, and then we'll move through other topics. Rainwater harvesting will be a new topic for this year. And then recharge and recovery is also a new one. So if you were with us last year, those are the months you might want to start if you want more information on those topics. Okay. With this program, it does have the fact sheet, and this is our guide. We kind of sandwich it, so we tell you what we're going to talk about at the very beginning, and then we give you the content, and then we remind you at the end. So this program today is the State of Arizona's Groundwater Management Act, and that has been in effect since 1980. There's more details to this, of course. The Department of Water Resources, which is the state agency, works to secure the long-term supplies of Arizona, so not just here in this active management area, but across the state. And they also enforce regulatory requirements, whether you're in an active management area like we are, or somewhere else. So today I have the pleasure, the last time we spoke about this, last year we looked at water management from the perspective of basically the territorial time until just before 1980, because we wanted you to understand that water management happens throughout the ages. And conditions change, demographics change, there's things that happen along the way. And so you probably heard me say last time that 1864 to about 1970s was kind of the Wild West of water a little bit. And there were reasons why the Groundwater Management Act came into effect in Arizona. But today I have the pleasure of, and we're very fortunate, we have a speaker, his name is Jim Holt. He is a Prescott area resident since 1993. He has over 21 years of professional water resource management experience with the Arizona Department of Water Resources. That included 5 years as the area director for this active management area. So there used to be a local office. It was out by Watson Lake, and when we had that economic downturn, the state office kind of consolidated back into Phoenix. So they closed their offices in Tucson, here in Phoenix, and in the Pinal area, which is the Casa Grande area. So he was the area director for this area during his 30 years of his water management career. In the last 2 years, he has been a consultant and the market coordinator for Matrix New World's Southwest Groundwater. So you're probably familiar with a firm called Southwest Groundwater Consultants. They were acquired by Matrix New World. So it's the same friendly faces we've had in this area, the same company that we've known in the past. So he assists clients with water resource planning, water management, regulatory compliance, public relations, and marketing. So I'd like to introduce Jim Holt and thank him very much. We can give him a round of applause now because like a lot of you, we have a lot of experience in this area, and it's really, we're very fortunate to have him join us today. So
Thank you.
I'll pass over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good morning. How is everybody today? I recognize a lot of faces here. It's nice to see you. Leslie asked me if I would give a presentation on Department of Water Resources and water management from the state's perspective. My presentation will only be about an hour and 45 minutes, maybe 2 hours. So now we'll try to go through this very quickly. We'll try not to do a lot of detail. It's easy to get lost in the weeds in a lot of this. It's certainly not my intention to have that happen to us today. So again, thank you all very much for having me here. I appreciate it, and I'm happy to be here to help. 1980 was an important period of time for the state of Arizona. One thing that was occurring during this period of time was an interest on the part of the state to build infrastructure to import surface water from the Colorado River into the central Arizona basins. The federal government was at this time getting close to approving construction funds for Central Arizona project, but the federal government also had some reluctance about funding such a large water importation project in the middle of the desert if the state and local governments were not adequately protecting their groundwater supplies. So there was a little bit of a squeeze or a threat that was put on the state that the federal government was suggesting that we're not too interested in doing this big surface water project unless you can convince us that you're going to actively and aggressively manage and conserve your groundwater supplies. So the 1980 Groundwater Management Act was in fact that effort to demonstrate leadership and that the state was willing and capable of administering its water supplies. So the picture down on the bottom is kind of an interesting one. I recognize some of those individuals. Sitting at the table, though, is Bruce Babbitt. And it was Bruce Babbitt that brought all these interests together to do the 1980 Groundwater Management Act. Department of Water Resources was established as a part of the 1980 Groundwater Management Act to manage water supplies. But the water quality management programs were housed with the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality. One of the major aspects of the 1980 Groundwater Management Act was the designation of active management areas. Active management areas are also groundwater basins. A groundwater basin hydrologically can be viewed as something like bowls of water underneath the surface of the ground. Water contained within one groundwater basin is determined to be hydrologically separate from groundwater that's contained within adjoining basins. So they're discrete bodies of water below the surface of the ground. There are 5 of these groundwater basins that were designated as active management areas. These are areas of the state where either our populations are most concentrated and or our demand for water, particularly groundwater, is the highest. So here's a map of the state of Arizona that shows the active management areas. So we have an active management area around the Phoenix metropolitan area. This is again a discrete body of groundwater. An now active management area, which is not necessarily an active management area with a very high concentration of population, but those of you that are familiar with the state recognize that it's an area where demand for groundwater has historically and continues to be very high for agricultural crop production. Tucson active management area, which goes all the way down to the international border, and then a smaller active management area at the very end. This is the Santa Cruz active management area. The last active management area is the Prescott active management area, and it's located here. We're located right about there. So the active management area contains population centers for City of Prescott, Town of Prescott Valley, Chino Valley, and Dewey-Humboldt. This map also includes 3 other areas that are referred to as INAs. These are areas where groundwater supplies are threatened, but the only management strategy that's been imposed is to limit new water use for irrigated agriculture. So one of those areas exists Joseph City, Harquahala, INA, and then the Douglas irrigation non-expansion area. So these were the areas that were established for the most comprehensive groundwater management programs that came from the 1980 Groundwater Management Act. So again, 1980 Groundwater Management Act doesn't actively regulate groundwater outside of active management areas. There is a requirement, though, that if water use is going to occur outside of active management areas, that the water be placed to a beneficial use. We mentioned a moment ago the irrigation non-expansion areas. The 1980 Groundwater Management Act does require that all wells be registered. Wells were registered prior to this point of time through programs with the Arizona State Land Department, but these programs were not well administered and weren't very comprehensive. So there was a whole new registration of wells that occurred with the 1980 Groundwater Management Act. There was also the implementation of groundwater well construction standards, that wells had to be constructed in a very specific way to ensure that we were protecting the quality of our water supplies. One other thing that this slide doesn't address, which was extremely controversial, and that was the implementation of water monitoring and measuring programs within active management areas. This means that wells were, for the first time, required to be metered. That was not without a great deal of controversy. When the folks were kind of framing the 1980 Groundwater Management Act, there was a great deal of resistance about measuring water from my well. What are you going to do with that information? Once you begin monitoring and measuring it, you're going to take it away from me. All kinds of things occurred. But they persevered, and they actually made that a provision of the 1980 Groundwater Management Act.
Notice that UMA is not on there.
It's not. And why do you think that would be?
All agriculture.
All agriculture, and also what is their supply of water?
Some of it's from the river.
Almost, yeah, a lot of it is from the river. And what isn't diverted at the surface of the ground is probably river water that is subflow, but below the surface of the ground. So yeah, that's not to say that there aren't water management issues along the Colorado River. There certainly are. But yeah, we were pretty much concentrating this presentation on water management for groundwater. So the Department of Water Resources is a steward of future long-term water supplies for the citizens of the state of Arizona. In that it is the primary purpose of the department to protect water supplies for future generations. So it's economic development, and it's also providing water for future generations to be able to live, recreate, and be part of the community. There are a number of values that the department uses to implement their programs, such as highest standards and technical expertise, integrity, empowering employees to be problem solvers, being vigilant in protecting water rights and supplies, and that's water rights not only within state but outside of the state, and leadership and collaboration. With my 21 years with the Department of Water Resources, I had, I think, a very enjoyable, very positive, very educational career with the department. One of the things also that the Department of Water Resources has been a very strong supporter of is additional educational opportunities for employees. The Department of Water Resources partnered with the Arizona Department of Administration and Arizona State University to further certified public manager education. In fact, I had the opportunity to become certified as a certified public manager through the Department of Water Resources. But the thing I think that's important to remember is that there's been a great deal of growth with the Department of Water Resources. When I started with the department in early 1981, there were maybe 35 employees in the entire agency. The director and some of his staff and a few Indians, but not an awful lot of workers. When I left the agency 21 years later, there were probably 235 employees. So a great deal of growth. But they attracted, I think, some of the highest quality, some of the smartest individuals in the state to begin to implement some of these programs. The number of programs that the department administers, as you can imagine, is very large. And we're not going to talk about all of these, but there are a couple of them I think are important. Of course, we talked about active management areas. Another very important topic is general stream adjudications. I bet a lot of you have probably heard of adjudications. That's an attempt of the state to try to quantify and prioritize water users within specific watersheds. So if you would imagine, for example, a course of a river, and the very first guy that got there to use any of that water supply is located somewhere in the middle of that stream, that length of stream, and he's using the water for agricultural purposes. Then the next person comes in and does something similar, and maybe either up or below where this individual is. The guy that was there first should have his needs met first before the second person has available water supply to do his activities. And if you multiply that times 10, times 10, times 10, you quickly can understand what a conundrum that becomes to resolve in trying to prioritize literally thousands or tens of thousands, or in fact, hundreds of thousands of water users throughout a long stretch of river within a water basin, a watershed. The general stream adjudication effort is attempting to do that. They've been working on it since 1980, and they've issued some preliminary reports and some draft reports. But there are some real big issues there that are difficult to resolve, particularly the differentiation between surface water and groundwater. So that's an important one. Assured and adequate water supplies dictate how water is made available for future subdivision growth. Within active management areas, water supplies have to be made available, determined to be available for 100 years before new lots can be offered for sale. Outside of active management areas, the test is the same, but the result is whether or not an assured water supply has been established. And even if a determination has been made that an assured water supply for 100 years is not available, outside of an active management area, those lots can still be offered for sale. We just need to be sure that those lots that the literature, sales literature for those lots adequately describes that an assured, or in this case, a future water supply has not been determined to be available. Prior to this point in time, there was real estate sales throughout the state of Arizona, particularly in this area of the state, where lands were subdivided, offered for sale, and literature is either silent or misleading about the availability of water. So that's been a very big consumer protection aspect of the Department of Water Resources. A couple more of these that I think are extremely important. Whoops, wrong button. We'll go back here. Doing some drought management and planning for drought. This is also connected to issues along the Colorado River and drought throughout a particular region as opposed to an area of the state. The Department of Water Resources has a very robust hydrology department, as you might imagine. The department issues very high quality reports. They're carefully analyzed and vetted and reviewed. And I don't think that there's probably a better hydrology division with any state government anywhere that's any better than the Department of Water Resources. Recharge. That's an extremely important aspect of water management as well. The department permits recharge facilities and strategies to recharge aquifers, whether or not those aquifers are being recharged with surface water or effluent that's been treated to drinking water quality standards. A lot of Colorado River water, in fact, gets imported through the CAP to central Arizona for the purpose of long-term storage beneath the surface of the ground. That whole topic is what is referred to as water banking. So these are a number of the programs that the department administers, and I kind of highlighted a few that I thought were most important. The city of Prescott, as you can imagine, as the largest municipality within this active management area, has a number of programs that are directly regulated by the Department of Water Resources. There's a listing here that describes some of these either important legal documents or permits that the city of Prescott has to pay attention to all the time. There's a decision and order which describes the water that's available, that's been determined to be available by the Department of Water Resources for the city of Prescott. That decision and order was modified about year 2005? 2009. Yep. There were a number of aspects of that modification. Probably the most important one was the inclusion of Big Chino subbasin water in the city's assured water supply. Aquifer storage and recovery facility out by the airport has a number of permits associated with it in terms of how it's operated, what kind of reporting requirements are in place. The city also owns a number of pieces of land that have irrigation grandfather rights. Irrigation grandfathered right allows a property owner to irrigate more than 2 acres of ground within an active management area. If you don't have an irrigation grandfathered right, you're not entitled to irrigate new land. So that's how those work. Statement of claimants are the instruments that are used for individuals to notify the Department of Water Resources of their belief that they should be included in one of these adjudication actions for surface water evaluation. The city is also required to design and implement drought management plans. The city owns and operates a number of dams. These dams are, the larger ones are referred to as jurisdictional dams, and they are regulated by the Department of Water Resources, not only for the operation of those dams, but also for their evaluation of their safety. There are a number of water claims, and the city has a number of wells throughout the active management area, some very small, some used only for monitoring, and some used for large municipal water supply wells. There are 7 of those large municipal water service wells that are located in the community of Chino Valley, those of you that were not aware of that. So, as Leslie mentioned, the idea is we're going to tell you what we're going to tell you, and then we tell you, and then we tell you that we told you that. So that's what the fact summary is, the fact sheet summary is entitled to do here. Again, 1980 was a critical period of time. The state of Arizona probably more aggressively manages its water supplies than any state in the country. There are a number of states that have looked to the 1980 Groundwater Management Act to model water legislation in their states or communities. The 1980 Groundwater Management Act has won a number of awards as well. ADWR is working to secure long-term water supplies for both economic development and for future generations. And active management areas are the tool that the department uses to manage water supply in those areas where either population demand is greatest or water demand for agriculture is also important. So if there are questions, I'd love to answer any questions. Yes, ma'am.
What are the 4 dams?
Well, the dams that are jurisdictional would be Watson
Yes,
and Willow,
yes,
Goldwater,
and the other one, upper and lower.
upper and lower Goldwater. Mm-hmm. Okay. And jurisdictional dams are regulated by size. There are a number of smaller dams, but if they are so small, the department doesn't actively manage them the way they do with the larger jurisdictional dams. More questions? Yes, ma'am.
On one of your slides, you talked about distinguishing between surface water and groundwater, and How about the whole issue of groundwater surface water?
It's a problem. It's been difficult for the state to deal with that issue, quite frankly. We think about surface water typically as flowing within defined banks of rivers and streams and creeks. But we know that that's not the entire extent of what surface water is, that there's an underground influence of surface water, and that surface water and groundwater either impact one another, influence one another, or in fact are not indistinguishable in some cases. And that's a very difficult hydrologic question that the state's been struggling with for a long time, and still hasn't adequately resolved.
Meanwhile, you're dried up a lot of these rivers.
Yeah, that's true.
So, the facts are just giving the case. But yeah, so the department still is struggling with how to deal with that.
Yes, yes. There have been a number of proposed mechanisms to make that differentiation. They've gone to courts, and judges, in fact, have said, with the help of hydrologists arguing different points of view, that one particular scheme can't be implemented for a number of different reasons. But yeah, sometimes it's judges and not hydrologists that make some of these determinations. So that's kind of tough. Back here first, and then I'll get you.
My question is in tradition of Herb Gunther, who I think you've heard of.
Oh yeah, I worked for Herb Gunther.
This is so complex but yet so simple. The conflict between geology, hydrology, and political. The political side seldom ever hear mentioned. Within the department, your department, one of the tenets is empowerment. Those people that really know the facts, or as best as science can determine those, would maybe say, simpler solution would be limiting or stopping housing development growth. That moves it over into the political side. Of those two sides, which do you see presently has sway within the department? Good ideas, good solutions, but yet this is a political concept that people are terrified of. Herb Gunther probably said it back in 2002, the best I've ever heard it.
And do you remember what his quote was about that?
It was kind of the whole view. I mean, this is big time stuff that goes on all in the western state. But his question was right over here in Prescott, from a Prescottonian, was, Herb, where do you think the first big crisis in water is going to hit in the state of Arizona? Prescott, Arizona, was his answer.
Yeah. Now, recognizing too that part of that answer has to do with the Prescott Active Management Area, which is a groundwater basin that's experiencing aquifer overdraft, doesn't have access to a large surface water resource to try to mitigate that overdraft. So the Prescott Active Management Area is kind of out there all by itself without any connection to any other supply of water to help accomplish that safe yield goal. With respect to your question, there is and always has been tension, I think, between science and politics, whether we're talking about water or environmental quality or air quality or anything else. Sometimes that tension, I agree with you, has something like a pendulum. It swings one way for a while and then it kind of swings back the other way for a while. There's no doubt that there are large political decisions that people want to see made, irrespective of scientific evaluations or determinations. I don't have an answer for you about how to get that resolved, but I do know that prior to 1980, before we even had opportunity to measure and monitor groundwater wells, we know a lot more now than we knew then. We also have the ability to regulate water users in a manner now that we never were able to before. So we've made a great deal of progress. Is there more progress to be made? Absolutely. But yeah, it's a tough decision. It's a tough decision. And your question?
Just as an aside to this gentleman's comment, everyone knows water flows downhill, but it also flows uphill towards money. So that answers part of your concern there. It does flow down, it does flow uphill towards money. But my question to you is, you mentioned the Groundwater Management Act in 1980 required reporting to the department extractions. And I've heard in other lectures that the modeling that's taking place in the Prescott AMA, groundwater modeling, one of the large sources of errors is a lack of data, pumping data from smaller extraction wells. So could you clear that up? If the GMA required pumping data, why is there a lack of pumping data for developing the model?
Here's kind of the backdrop. The framers of the 1980 Groundwater Management Act came from Central Arizona. Central Arizona historically has a population that has relied on municipal water deliveries and private water companies to supply their water. That's different than the backdrop that we have here, where we have such a large concentration of these small wells that are delivering water for individual residential homes. When the 1980 Groundwater Management Act was hammered out, if you will, there had to be a recognition that monitoring and measuring the withdrawal of water from all of these wells was going to be problematic. So the compromise was, we'll measure the wells that pump more than 35 gallons a minute, and that will be the criteria. An exempt well is one that produces less than 35 gallons a minute. A non-exempt well, which requires metering, will be greater than 35. So that decision made sense for Central Arizona because there wasn't nearly the concentration of these small wells that we have here. The concentration of small wells here, in fact, make exempt wells, if you added them all together, probably the second largest water provider in the AMA. It is huge, and it is a little bit of an issue. Now, you can certainly take the idea that not only are they restricted in terms of the flow rate, but they're also restricted in the annual amount of withdrawal, but nobody measures them. So they say an exempt well, 35 gallons a minute or less, and 10 acre-feet a year, no more. But nobody measured that, and nobody knows that that's exactly what happens or not. Every time the state and or local municipalities have suggested that we really need to get a better handle on this and start metering some of these wells, even on a voluntary basis, there's still a lot of backlash. People don't want to do it. And again, I think it's the same kind of backlash that we experienced when we talked about metering wells for the very first time in 1980. So yes, our understanding about that amount of water is based on assumptions and how much water that on average these wells use. We know how many they are, we know where they're located, but yeah, we don't have any actual withdrawals. Might we move in that direction someday? Maybe. But yeah, it would take pretty strong political will, I think, to implement that kind of program. But yeah, it's an issue. Yes?
It occurred to me the other day that this is actually the 20th anniversary of the Prescott AMA being declared out of state field. And I got out the declaration, which I just started to try to read. And at the time, the overdraft was at about 6,100 acre-feet. Well, in the past 20 years, the overdraft has tripled, I think, if I'm correct. One of the problems at the time of the declaration was the Great Flat Rush, which about 30, I think it was 32,000 lots were grandfathered.
That's right.
A lot of those lots were grandfathered in Prescott Valley. Do you happen to know how many undeveloped lots are
Left.
in well, all together, I guess, but especially in Prescott Valley, which is, operates under different rules?
Yeah, there was a bit of an unfortunate period of time. As you may recall, the state implemented the assured water supply rules for all the active management areas at the same time. And there was a little bit of hydrologic uncertainty about the Prescott active management area. There were some springs that hadn't flowed at all for a long period of time. They were beginning to flow at the time that the assured water supply rules were implemented. There were in fact some observations of rising or stable water levels, groundwater levels. So the state said, well, we'll implement the assured water supply rules for all of the AMAs except Prescott, because we're uncertain about the hydrologic reality there. But we'll say after 3 years of increasing growth and decreasing water level, then we'll declare groundwater mining. That created a really large buffer for property owners to begin developing strategy to get allocation to groundwater that would in fact exasperate groundwater mining. And that's the plat rush that you're referring to. I don't know the exact number of lots that remain out of those 32,000 lots. Those 32,000 lots got a reservation on groundwater either through being platted or preliminarily platted by the jurisdiction within which they were located, whether it was city, town, or Yavapai County. But the growth that we see continuing even today are among those 32,000 lots. So you look at that corridor along Glassford Hill Road. Those are all preliminarily platted prior to declaration of groundwater mining, 3 years after the implementation of the assured water supply rules for everybody else. That was a long sentence. So I would suggest that there are probably, I don't know, it's a guess, but I'd say probably 2/3 of those have been built. There's probably still a third left. All of Prescott Lakes was part of that preliminary plat. And there are a number of smaller ones as well. Now, it could be that at some point in time, it might be nice to be able to blow a whistle and say, of those 32,000 lots, if you didn't get them built by now, you lose the water supply, and it's either available for something else or makes contribution back towards safe yield or whatever the case may be. There isn't a mechanism, though, I don't think that would allow that to happen.
One of the problems is now that as those lots are continuing to be built out, the overdraft, they add to the overdraft.
They do.
And, well,
This-
some areas outside of the city of Prescott haven't done anything about conservation to speak of, where some of these problems exist.
Mhm.
Do you have any thoughts on what can be done? Either,
Go back over here. There needs to be some political will, but there also needs to be incentive for that political will to build. Certainly, some communities have done a lot more than others. There's absolutely no question about that. That's not to say that there are communities here that have done nothing. I don't think that that's the case. The way that assured water supply implementation rolled out for the Prescott AMA, in fact, immediately ensured that aquifer overdraft was exasperated. It was made worse in order to be able to say it won't get any worse. And in fact, it should get better. But yeah, it didn't, I don't think, turn out the way that a lot of us had hoped. But it's what we ended up with. And if we look back to prior to 1980, it's better than where we were then. So does that mean that all the work's been done? No, there's still a lot left to do. So I think there was another question here. Yes, sir.
DWR's budget and staffing have cut really drastically.
Yes.
In 2008, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Has that been restored?
Leslie probably helped me. Now, Leslie is also I was going to say a refugee of the Department of Water Resources. That's probably not right. A veteran of the Department of Water Resources. Those cuts have been restored, but I don't think their budget has ever gotten back to where it was at that point in time. But yeah, I would say probably 2/3 of those budget cuts have been restored. So they're doing better than they were, but they haven't gotten back to where they were originally. Yes, ma'am.
Regarding the metering of the wells, So I heard you talk about 1980, but I'm assuming the metering of wells or that rule was later. So I have a two-part question. When was that, approximately? And then second of all, when you're talking about all these smaller wells in the area that are not related to subdivisions 35 plus gallons, so when someone goes in and buys a large piece of property in the Chino Valley, wants to put in a well, I'm assuming there's a permit to automatically meter now these days, the metering goes along with the new well?
Be nice if it did, but it doesn't, in answer to that question. And the metering requirement was in fact part of the 1980 Groundwater Management Act. So I think that there was a implementation period that allowed people to get to that point. There was also a mechanism that I think still exists today about some methods to measure water from a well that don't require metering, but do require assumptions about efficiency of a well and the amount of energy consumed by that motor and that pump over a period of time. So a lot of people were in fact measuring water withdrawals by converting electrical consumption records to get to how much water was pumped. And actually those work pretty close. Again, it's part of that hydrology unit that comes up with some of these ideas. But it's certainly much easier to install a meter which simply shows flow rate like a speedometer shows miles per hour, and then also an odometer on it as a totalizer. That's certainly much more efficient and easier. But yeah, smaller wells, even new ones, unless there's some regulatory requirement, are allowed to be drilled and used without any metering at all. Now, what also happens, and I know we may be running out of time, am I okay for a few more months? What also happens in these areas where we have high concentration of small domestic wells? Somebody can shout at that, I'm sure. What else do we have in those circumstances?
Homes of depression.
No, sometimes. I was thinking about septic tanks. So we have wastewater that is being deposited into septic tanks below the surface of the ground, as opposed to being collected, treated, and recharged back into the aquifer within a facility that was designed and constructed for that purpose. When at the surface of the ground you have a recharge facility through percolation, you'll have a reservoir or a pond, and from the surface of the ground, after you do it, keep putting water or effluent there, you'll establish a hydrologic connection almost between the surface of the ground and the aquifer that might be several hundred feet below the surface of the ground. Once that hydrologic connection has been made, you can put a lot of water into the ground really quickly. All these small individual residential septic tanks might be contributing something to aquifer recharge, might be, but it's extremely small in comparison. So there are some opportunities that we lose when we have these subdivisions that are allowed to occur with these individual small wells and also these individual residential septic tanks. We're not getting the recharge activity that we might otherwise get. One more question? And then
That's a burning question.
Get your
What's going on in Lake Mead, Lake Powell, that whole feds in 7 states? Will that have, in your opinion, educated opinion, will that have impact on Prescott?
No, I don't think so. No. It will have significant impacts in central Arizona.
For Arizona.
But not here. And again, that's not too dissimilar from what occurred in 1980. The federal government said to the states, you guys need to come up with a plan to resolve what you're going to do with continuing water shortages on the Colorado River. And if you don't, we'll come in and do it. And that's similar to what happened with the 1980 Groundwater Management Act. It's the federal government exerting its authority over states to do something that the would rather not talk about or not rather do it. The drought contingency plan was one of those. So it provided a framework for how they're going to share that shortage on the river. But I don't think it'll have an impact on us locally here. I'm going to get a question over here first.
So the number of non-exempt wells decreased in our area?
Oh no, it has not decreased at all. It continues to grow. There are some areas where the concentration of exempt wells is, you can't even map it.
I'm talking non.
Oh, non-exempt wells. A number of non-exempt wells decreasing. I don't know if they're decreasing, but they don't increase a lot, not like the exempt wells. Municipalities, water companies, they continue to need to either upgrade their facilities or drill new wells. There's not a lot of well drilling for large wells for agricultural purposes, and we know why that is, right? All those water rights which existed for landowners to farm agricultural lands within the active management area have now been converted to what? Rights or access to groundwater for subdivision purposes. Now, why did the state do that? This seems kind of goofy. It really did make some sense. The amount of water which could have been used to grow crops for the next 100 years on a piece of ground compared to the amount of water that the state would allow you to have in this exchange for credits for subdivision, the amount of water that could have been consumed for agriculture was hundreds of times more than the little bit of water that was made available for subdivision. So it gave access back to some groundwater, which again exasperates overdraft, but satisfies some political demand for growth. That's where all those agricultural acres went. So there's probably 90% of the agricultural lands that used to exist in the Prescott Active Management Area that are no longer here. They're gone, and they're gone permanently. They'll not come back. In exchange for the promise never to irrigate my land again, I get a small quantity of credits that can be made available then for future subdivision growth. So that's changed our community in some respects as well. Some would argue maybe not for the good. So one more, and then I'm going to let Leslie have the program back.
You're doing fine.
Yes, sir.
I noticed on your original map there, all of the AMAs except Prescott are kind of connected.
Yeah.
You have the general Phoenix area and the Tucson area,
Mm-hmm.
and I guess the Pinal area.
Yes.
And then Prescott's off by itself.
Yeah.
Prescott doesn't have access to any CAP water. There are no imports in. Why would the state carve that out to satisfy the feds when the feds don't even care about something that doesn't have CAP access?
At the time in 1980, there was the recognition that in fact aquifer overdraft was occurring in this groundwater basin all that way back. So that's why. Solution is going to be different. And the solution is likely going to include development of transportation and development of groundwater from up here in the Big Chino subbasin. Now, the state did recognize that the Prescott AMA sitting out there all by itself, unconnected to any federally subsidized water importation project, but we will give you access to Big Chino groundwater. Now, that's obviously not without its own problems, but there is a legislative exemption for the Prescott Active Management Area to obtain water from a groundwater basin next door. What's significant about that is there is also a state statute which prevents the transportation of groundwater across groundwater basin boundaries. So what it said was, we won't let you transport all this water back and forth across these groundwater basins except Prescott to get water out of the Big Chino. So that exemption was written into state statute specifically in recognition of the fact that the AMA had no connection to any other federally subsidized or even unfederally subsidized water importation.
I notice there's nothing in the Flagstaff area, there's no AMA. Can you just briefly say what their source is? Are they in overdraft? Because Flagstaff actually has a higher population than Prescott.
Yeah, it does have higher population. Their access to groundwater is from very deep wells. And the groundwater basin there is large. Don't know, are they in aquifer overdraft? People have looked at that question, and I'm sure that depending on your perspective, you might come up with some different answers. Flagstaff actually has gone outside of its boundaries into an adjoining groundwater basin to develop a supply of water for future importation purposes. So apparently the municipality of Flagstaff is concerned about that issue as well. So Good. I'm going to let Leslie have her program back. I really appreciate the opportunity to come and chat with you. And,
Thank you, Jim, and thanks everybody for thanking him for coming today. We really appreciate his time in the business and seeing the history over the years. I'll wrap this up so that you have time to find people you might want to chat with more before we close out. But I wanted to bring to your attention your fact sheet again. And on that one, I felt it was really important that with Jim giving the background, that gave you the connectivity of why this area does what it does. There's regulations that we follow. And on the back, it speaks, there's 4 that are identified, the annual water withdrawal and use report. So somebody had brought up a question about that. And those are due that, basically that tells the state where we've moved all sorts of water this year. So what have we pumped, what have we recharged, what has went through the wastewater treatment plants, what customer types did it go out to. So the city will be filing that at the end of March. That's when it's due every year, and then they review it and then do some extra work and get back in touch with us if they have questions. The next, piece that's really important so you can have that connectivity to what's happening locally here is the gallons per capita per day. So once again, that's worked up by the state of Arizona based on our annual reports the city sends. This past year, they worked it up as 118 gallons per capita per day. And on that topic, April's Water Awareness Month, and we will have a display about gallons per capita per day in the viewery up here at the library. So I hope you stop by and see that. The next piece is the drought plan. And so this, you can read a little bit about that. The city also files that with the state every 5 years. And mostly that's based on codes the city has always had. And so if there's a resource level issue, then we start putting forth requirements to reduce the use across the city. And so whether it be drought related or a mechanical failure, that's when we look at the resource levels. And so the city hasn't had that situation. The last time that they were talking to the residents through the newspaper about that was when we had bark beetle. And so there was a lot of pumping going on because people thought that if they watered their trees, it would protect the tree and it wouldn't have to use it. But if it was already, it had an infestation, no amount of water was going to protect the tree at that point. So that gives you a little bit more about that. And then the last one is the decadal management plan. So the state puts forward decadal plans. We're in the 4th one right now. And I bring that up as well as we have a little bit of literature on the back counter, or the back table there, that if you want to look at those things a little bit more. There was also a question about in the modeling and exempt wells and how do they determine how much. There's resources online for that too. So I hope you found this program helpful today. I did have an email come in this morning that I usually don't do announcements, but this one might be helpful to somebody, and I'll have the paperwork up here. But the University of Arizona, Yavapai County Cooperative Extension offices will be providing a well owner seminar. So it says, do you own a private well? Do you drink water from your well? Have you had your water tested lately? So that's going to be held April 16th, 2019, from 5 to 8 p.m. At the rodeo grounds. So that's 840 Rodeo Drive. And it will be led by folks from Department of Agriculture. Sorry, I don't think I have that quite right. Let me jump up here. A professor from the U of A Cooperative Extension Water Quality Specialist, and a gentleman, a registered geologist. So if you do have a private well and you want more information, I do have the So we'll go ahead and wrap this up, and I'll get to the end. So next month we will be talking about conservation. We're heading into April's Water Awareness Month, and that's where we usually see people doing more outside and wanting to learn more about conservation. And fortunately, we have our Water Resource Coordinator, Leah, will be presenting next month. And then moving to the end, if you do have questions, I'm here. I'm Leslie Grazer. Leah's in the back, so she covers conservation and helping with building permit approvals and lots of other things like I've mentioned in the past. Matt Colleen is the environmental coordinator, and he spoke actually last month with Orrin Thomas, who's a stormwater specialist. They're here if you have additional questions. And then once again, Jim Holt, if you have more information or would like to seek more information from him as well. So thank you again for attending today, and please take vegetables with you so those don't go to waste. Thanks everybody. We'll see you next time.